Good evening, everyone. We are quickly arriving towards the end of the book of Jeremiah. In chapter 46, we have two sections that we need to look at. The first section is from verses 1 to 12. The second section is from verse 13 onwards. Each of these sections are having about 20 over years apart. Now, in chapter 46, as we begin, it is with regards to prophecies against the nations. It begins this way: the word of Jehovah, which came to Jeremiah the prophet against the nations. This is actually recorded in Jeremiah chapter 25 and from verses 15 to 26. In that overview, there were many nations uh, recorded for punishment, approximately 11 nations. In the coming few chapters, from chapter 46 to 51, we will read about 7 nations. These 7 nations are singled out to experience greater punishment because they have directly or indirectly caused more suffering and problems to the nation of Israel, particularly the kingdom of Judah. And so we can see that God is treating everyone fairly, that the 11 nations, though they will be punished by God through Babylon, there were 7 nations that were actively doing something directly or indirectly against Judah. And hence, God considers these 7 nations as deserving greater punishment. In chapter 46, we begin with the nation of Egypt right here. Now, the reason why it was against Egypt was because all the way up to chapter 45, we found, if you recall, uh, the people decided not to stay in Judah and brought everyone, including Jeremiah, into Egypt. And the prophecies that we have read thus far was that God is going to bring the same disaster on Egypt as he did on Judah, which also means that whoever runs to Egypt for protection and avoidance of any battle with Babylon will be totally mistaken. They will suffer the same problem and the same effect of the judgment of God. And so, chapter 46 seems to have been compiled to be back to back to each other. The first 12 verses records the prophecy with regards to the battle at Carchemish, and that would have happened long before chapter 46, verse 13. So let us begin. This is against Egypt. As it was against Egypt, it has something to do with the first instance of the clash. It is concerning the army of Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt at the time, which was by the river Euphrates in Carchemish, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah. Just a little bit of a background. If you recall in Second Kings, back in chapter 23, And in 29 to 34, you will read about Pharaoh Necho and Josiah. Now, Pharaoh Necho was going to battle with Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. You need to understand that this first king is not the son, but the father. The father was king of Babylon, and that was Nebuchadnezzar Senior. But Nebuchadnezzar Jr. was the general of the army of Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar Jr. is the one that fought with Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, at Carchemish. This is a historical battle and it is well recorded in contemporary history. It took 4 years into the fourth year of Jehoiakim. Now remember, after Josiah died, the people had placed Jehoahaz, Jehoahaz as king. But Pharaoh Necho took him out and installed Jehoiakim instead. And Jehoiakim in the fourth year of Jehoiakim means that Jehoahaz was only there for a very short time, 3 months. And after he was taken out, in that same first year to the fourth year, this was the duration of the battle of Carchemish. Now, in the description that follows, you would see from verses 3 to 12 are descriptions of how Pharaoh Necho was completely destroyed. So let's take a quick look and see what transpired. It says here in verse 3, prepare the buckler and the shield and approach the battle. Harness the horses. Now remember, horses are used for battles. Donkeys are used for work, like the ox and oxen. But horses, specifically horses, is a description of an animal for battle. So, and mount up, you horsemen, stand forth with your helmets, polish your spears, and put on the armor. Why have I seen them dismayed and turned back? Now, this verse 5 here is about terror all around, and this is about them, the Egyptians. Their mighty ones are beaten down, they have speedily fled and did not look back, literally running away from Nebuchadnezzar for fear. And in this case, in verse 5, the idea is, I would say, more than fear. I think a better word that we can describe is terror. They were terrified all around, says Jehovah. Now, this is a description of God talking about the Egyptians who will be totally destroyed up till verse 5. In verse 6, do not let the swift flee away, nor the mighty man escape. They will stumble and fall toward the north by the river Euphrates. This idea of do not let them would be referring to the Babylonians. Who is this coming up like a flood whose waters move like rivers? Well, it says here, Egypt rises up like a flood and its waters move like rivers. And he says, I will go up and cover the earth. I will destroy the city and its inhabitants. This is what Pharaoh Necho, uh, the the Egyptians, right? This is what the Egyptians is saying. Verse 9. Come up, O horses, and rage, O chariots, talking still about the Egyptians, and let the mighty men come forth, the Ethiopians. Now, the Ethiopians in this case, in verse 10, would be very much not exactly the Ethiopian. This is actually our word here. In verse 9, it's Cush, as you know, and we have talked about this. This is Cush, and the Libyans is Put. Not exactly Libyans. So Cush would be south of Egypt. Put would be west of Egypt, having joined the Egyptians who handled the shield, and the Lydians. This would be the people from Lud. These are the people from Lud, right? Who handle the bows and bend the bow, and basically telling us that this is what the Egyptians are thinking of. As in any battle, nobody approaches a battle with a negative view. They are always optimistic. And Jeremiah is recounting this as a mock or a taunt to Pharaoh Necho. Verse 10. It says here, for this is the day of the Lord God of hosts. This is Adonai Yehovah Tzevaot, a day of vengeance. And some would say that this would be a vengeance for Josiah. Now, I just put it here as a remark uh, that some people think that the vengeance that God has imposed upon the Egyptians was to avenge the death of Josiah, that he may avenge himself on his adversaries. The sword shall devour, it shall be filled and made drunk with their blood. Now, this is an A and a B, as you can see. The word sachet in verse 10 is filled, and made drunk is also filled with alcohol, right? And but in this case, filled with blood, made drunk with blood, these are all imagery of a complete destruction. It says, for the Lord God of hosts, and that would be Adonai Yehovah Tzevaot, has made a sacrifice in the north country by the Euphrates. All of these is an imagery type of a language. Sacrifice is a slaughter. And what it does mean is that in the north country by the river Euphrates at Carchemish, there will be utter destruction. It is not a sacrifice in the religious sense. Verse 11. It says here, go up to Gilead and take balm. Now, in Gilead, it is famous for its balm. Uh, Essentially, it is a kind of a medicated ointment that will soothe. So, this is really, I would think that it doesn't matter what they put in, the destruction is going to be complete. So, it's a taunt of the Egyptians. Go up to Gilead and take balm, O virgin, the daughter of Egypt. In vain, you will use many medicines. This will be many remedies, as in verse 11, many ways of um, healing potions, right? Healing potions. So, medicine is a modern day word, but it's good. And whatever you use, you shall not be cured. The nations, now, whenever you talk about the nations here, would be the Goyim. The Goyim. Egypt is also part of the Goyim, but the other nations have heard of your shame, and your cry has filled the land. For the mighty man has stumbled against the mighty, they have fallen together. What this basically tells us is that the defeat of Egypt is so great that it really sends shivers to all the nations. That's basically how the passage is trying to describe how God is using Nebuchadnezzar to lay down the punishment and destruction of the Egyptians at Carchemish. Now we come to verse 13 onwards. That would be another event also between Babylon and Egypt. In verse 13, this is 26 years later. This is a continuation from chapter 44. Yesterday, when we were discussing chapter 44, we were talking about how the men from Judah had so decided. Yochanan and the army and the arrogant people brought Jeremiah and all the innocents down to live in Egypt to continue the idolatry. And so, 26 years after the battle of Carchemish, we have another word of prophecy. The word that the Lord spoke to Jeremiah the prophet, the word being the issues that Jehovah God has spoken to Jeremiah the prophet, how Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, would come and strike the land of Egypt. This is a different event. So if you think of it this way, we have Carchemish. This is the river Euphrates. This is Euphrates. And we have Carchemish right here. This is Carchemish. But Egypt is quite far away. Egypt is all the way down here. And so what we have here is at the Sinai Peninsula, the Pharaoh has to traverse this way. The Pharaoh has to traverse all the way up to Carchemish and will have to pass through Israel. So, in the first instance, as Pharaoh Necho passed through Israel, King Josiah didn't allow and he was killed. And Israel came under the powers of Egypt. Now, after the battle of Carchemish, we see a second thing happen. And the second thing that happens is that the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, is now coming down to Egypt. Now, by this time, Judah is already gone. And one of the reasons why Judah actually fell was because the king Zedekiah had trusted in Egypt to defend. But when Egypt came to the defense of Zedekiah, they saw the army of Nebuchadnezzar and they were afraid. And so they turned back. And when King of Babylon saw that nobody is there to defend Zedekiah, then he took the king and the city and destroyed it all. With that, God is going to double punish Egypt. And in verse 13 would be the word of the Lord that spoke to Jeremiah the prophet, how Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, would come and strike the land of Egypt. And this time will be a mighty blow because of what Egypt had done, not in agreement, not keeping the promise to Zedekiah, but in fact turned away and left Zedekiah to be on his own. So now we continue into verse 14. Verse 14 continues from chapter 44. We are now told, declare in Egypt. And by this time, Jeremiah is in Egypt and proclaim in Migdol, proclaim in North, proclaim in Tachpanhes, where these are the places where the Jews were taking refuge and lighting incense to the Elohim of the land, and says that stand fast and prepare yourselves, for the sword devours all around you. That is a declaration that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is going to come and wipe out Egypt. Why are your strong men swept away? Verse 15. None of them can stand because Jehovah drove them away. The idea of drove them away is also to thrust them down. That would be a better way of explaining. They cannot stand because God made them fall. He made many fall. Now, when God says he made them fall, it's not that he would zap them and then they fall off their horses. It's that God did not allow them to stand firm to defend because they are not as strong as the Babylonians. Yes, one fell upon another, and they said, let's stand up, let us go back to our own people and to the land of our nativity from the oppressing sword. What does this mean? Now, notice this is talking about people here. These are the Jews who are dwelling in Egypt. The prophecy is to tell them that, well, you think you can hide, but you can't. And God is getting the Babylonians to come and take them all away. Can they fight? No, they cannot. And so they want to go home. Go home to Judah. Because they are not there as citizens of Egypt. They never thought that this will ever happen to them. Verse 17, they are calling out there, Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now, when they call out to Pharaoh, uh, it really means very little. The king of Egypt is just a noise, it's just a sound, it's just a roar, right? That's what it's trying to say. It is just a roar. It's like a tiger roaring, but he has no teeth. And so God is giving this picture. He is just a noise. His appointed time has passed. Now, verse 17 basically is saying that he has passed, and this word he has passed talks about he has caused the appointed time to pass. That is how the Hebrew express it, not he has passed. He has caused the appointed time to pass. It basically means that he had a chance to stand up to fight, but because he had decided not to back Zedekiah, not to defend Judah from Babylon, and so it is seen by God as somebody who has reneged on the promise. And his time that he had an opportunity to stand is past. That would be the expression here. Verse 18 says, "As I live, says the king, whose name is Jehovah Tsevaot." And so we're talking about Jehovah here as the king. Surely, as Tabor is among the mountains, and Mount Tabor is about the highest mountain in north of Israel, and as Carmel by the sea, and Mount Carmel is literally just a little bit away from the seashore. He shall come, O you daughter dwelling in Egypt, prepare yourself to go into captivity, for north shall be waste and desolate without inhabitant. This is literally a warning to Egypt that the king of Babylon is definitely coming. He shall definitely come. You cannot hide. Now, in the coming verses, we actually see how the description is about the destruction of Egypt. It says Egypt is a pretty heifer, a beautiful calf. I think we can say that a beautiful calf, a pretty heifer. But destruction comes, the slaughter comes, and it comes from the north. And so it kind of tells you that it is Babylon coming from the north. Also, her mercenaries are in the midst like fat bulls, fatted calves. For they too have turned back and run away altogether. They did not stand. They are not going to fight for the day of their calamity, the day of their, uh, I guess we can say this as the burden, their calamity, their disaster, the day of disaster, the day of misfortune had come upon them. Their time of the punishment. So Babylon is executing punishment of God upon them. Her noise shall go like a serpent. Egypt's voice, her voice would be Egypt, like a serpent, a hiss, not like a roar. For they shall march with an army and come against her with axes like those who chop wood. Here they refers to Babylon. The army will come and it will be like a clearing out the forest, chopping down wood. Right? They shall cut down her forest, says Jehovah, though it cannot be searched, because they are innumerable and more innumerable than grasshoppers. Now, verse 23 basically tells us that the Babylonians, as described here, comes with the imagery of chopping down the trees of the forest, and the forest typically is symbolic of the leaders. And all of Egypt as leaders will be destroyed. All of Egypt will face complete destruction. They have many more of the army, but they cannot stand the Babylonians. So that's basically how a poetic way of describing the failure of Egypt. Carrying on in verse 24, says the daughter of Egypt shall be humiliated. This would be a better word. Humiliated. She shall be delivered into the hand of the people of the north. Remember, in this particular chapter, that would be Babylon. So, this is a prophecy, a prophetic passage of the second attack, which is 26 years later. Babylon will come down all the way because Israel is already in the hand of Babylon, and he comes into Egypt and takes over Egypt. Verse 25. Jehovah Zevaot, the Elohim of Israel, says this. And this is being repeated by Jeremiah. Behold, look, I will bring punishment on Ammon of No. Now, we don't exactly know who this Ammon of No is, but there seems to be indications that this is Alexandria. Very major place in Egypt. It continues to say, bring punishment on Alexandria, the Pharaoh, and Egypt with their Elohim, and upon their kings, the Pharaoh and those who trust in him. And I, Jehovah, will deliver them. Now, this word deliver them uh, is to place upon. I guess you can say that. Place upon or to give. I guess a give would be a better word. In the conquest, for example, when Joshua went into the promised land, God gave the land. So the idea of giving the land means allowing them to win the battles. Now, here God says, I will give them, and them here would be the Egyptians, into the hand of those who seek their lives, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and into the hands of his servants. Basically, this idea of giving is to place Egypt into the hands of Babylon. And basically, in a more poetic way, saying that Babylon will win the battle and Egypt will be destroyed. Afterward, it shall be inhabited as in the days of old. Now, what this means is after Egypt loses the battle, then basically what happens is there will be rest as in the days of old, until 40 years later, there will be the fall of Babylon. So 40 years later, Babylon falls. So the idea of inhabited in verse 26, it will be the same way of dwelling after Babylon falls. Now, that's the picture. So Egypt is not going to be forever and ever under somebody else, but they will revert back to their old system of the pharaohs after Babylon falls. In our last passage, it is actually directed to the Israelites, and particularly now, the Jews that were in Egypt. God says, "But you do not have to fear, O my servant Jacob, and do not be dismayed, O Israel." These are, this is an A and a B. And the whole picture here is the word do not be afraid and do not be terrified. So dismayed or broken, these are all good words. Do not be broken down, and both are similar idea of being afraid. Jacob, Israel. That's why this is an A and a B. So God says, don't worry. Basically, you can think of it as this: don't worry. And this is directed to the Jews. For behold, I, Jehovah, will save you. Now, this idea here of save you is to redeem you from afar. The picture here is save, redeem, deliver, no, all the same. This word here in verse 27, uh, it is to save, to cause you, cause to save you, I guess is a better word. Cause to save you, cause to deliver you, cause to liberate you, cause to be victorious. This is the same idea, to give you victory. Uh, and this is, I would say, a comfort to the Jews. And God says, and your offspring from the land of their captivity. The land of captivity will be Babylon, not Egypt. And God says, I will bring you back, and this will be 70 years. Jacob shall return, have rest, and be at ease, and no one shall make him afraid. This is the promise of God. In many chapters, we have seen this of the return to Jerusalem. God continues to encourage them. Do not fear, O Jacob, my servant, says the Lord. Now, this is one very interesting expression. Do not fear and do not be afraid. And now God calls Jacob as my servant. This is Av, uh, Avdi. Avdi, my servant. And the whole picture here is someone who listens and do as told. Typical concept of a servant. Today, servants are all over. The role hasn't changed. The concept of the word hasn't changed. The master tells the servant, and servant listens and goes and does the work. So when God calls Nebuchadnezzar my servant, essentially Nebuchadnezzar is one who listens to God to go and conquer. And in that conquering, presents judgment to the nations, including Judah. That's about it. It's not about faith in God, being honorable to God, being righteous to God, but it's being able to listen and do what God tells. So Jacob is also seen as my servant, says Jehovah. Right? Says Jehovah. God is also calling Jacob or Israel my servant. For I am with you. When God says I am with you, God is with them in their captivity, even in Egypt. For I will make a complete end of all the nations to which I have driven you, but I will not make a complete end of you. Now, this requires a bit of explanation. It is a play of words. It says, I will make a complete end, and this word end literally means a termination. It will also means a destruction, to which I have driven you. People in Judah has run to Babylon, run to Egypt, run to the rest of the places around them. And God says all these nations will come to an end. So Babylon will come to an end. Egypt will also come to an end. But I will not make a complete end of you. And this word complete end is actually the same word. So the nations will receive the complete end, but Israel will not. That's the play of words. And God says this, I will rightly correct you. And this word correct you is admonish you to the right way, chastise you to become right, right? Chastise to be right. For I will not leave you wholly unpunished. Now, what does that mean? I will not leave you wholly unpunished is an expression which needs a little bit of an a retranslation, I think. I think this is not particularly right. The idea here is to acquit you. I will not completely destroy you. I will not completely destroy you. I shall not destroy you utterly. This is the Hebrew expression, which actually makes this into an A and a B, as you can see, right? Here, God will make the nations into a termination, complete destruction. Israel will not. And now God says, I will chastise you to be right, but I will not completely destroy you. So the focus here is this, there is hope. Israel will not be totally destroyed. So in so doing, talking about Egypt and judging Egypt, Israel is there. Why? Because they went there to hide. Many of them would have died. They have fought with the Egyptians against the Babylonians and died by the sword. Those who defied God will also die by the plagues. But there are those who want to go back, and God says, I will let you come back. And so God says there will be a remnant. And so, as what we can see here, there will always be a remnant. Now, how does God choose the remnant? These are those who obey God. Not many of them, but there are those who will be corrected, they will repent, and they will do what is right by God, and God will bring them back. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.